70% of the guitar stuff on that record doesn't sound like guitar. It sounds like a keyboard or some other weird instrument.
For decades, Alex Lifeson built a reputation as the laid-back genius behind Rush. While Geddy Lee brought the energy and Neil Peart delivered philosophical depth, Lifeson often played the role of the quiet comic relief. He was the guy cracking absurd jokes in interviews, never chasing headlines or stirring up drama. To most fans, he was humble, funny, and self-deprecating, the last person you'd expect to throw shade at fellow musicians. But underneath that calm, witty surface, there were rare moments when Lifeson dropped comments that made fans sit up straight and ask, wait, did he really say that? Unlike many rock stars who thrive on controversy, Lifeson didn't need drama to be respected. That's what made his occasional blunt remarks so intriguing. They weren't frequent, but when they came, they felt calculated, like he had kept his thoughts bottled up for years and finally decided to let a little steam out. He never published a hate list, of course, but through scattered interviews and offhand remarks, Lifeson revealed flashes of what, or who, he didn't admire in the guitar world. And trust me, for a guy known for musical integrity, those flashes hit hard. What makes this even more fascinating is Lifeson's unique delivery style. He'd drop a snarky line with a straight face and a glint in his eye, leaving fans wondering whether he was joking or throwing down a silent diss track. One minute he'd praise another artist, the next he'd say something like, well, that's what you get when you only play 3 chords. Was he being sarcastic? Was it a joke? Or was it a veiled critique? That mystery is what fuels fan theories even today. You see, Alex Lifeson didn't attack people. He attacked approaches to the instrument. His issue wasn't with fame or popularity. It was with what he saw as laziness, gimmicks, or a lack of musical depth. And when a musician like Lifeson, someone who spent his life pushing creative boundaries, takes subtle shots like that, it's not just opinion, it becomes legend. And it's the first piece of the puzzle in figuring out which guitarist he may have secretly disliked all along. In the late 70s, the music world faced a massive cultural collision. On one side stood the technical titans of progressive rock, bands like Rush, Yes, and Genesis. On the other, the raw energy and rebellious attitude of punk rock exploded onto the scene. And right in the middle of it all was Alex Lifeson. He never directly called anyone out, but in several interviews over the years, Lifeson made a few snarky remarks that raised more than a few eyebrows. One of his most infamous comments? A jab at musicians who only know 3 chords and think that's revolutionary. It was a short statement, but for fans of music history, it hit like a grenade. Many took that line as a veiled dig at bands like the Ramones, the Clash, or the Sex Pistols, the very pioneers of punk who wore their simplicity like a badge of honor. For Lifeson, who spent his career crafting complex chord progressions and exploring unconventional harmonies, the glorification of musical minimalism seemed not just lazy, but insulting. He wasn't just annoyed, he was clearly frustrated. He even went as far as to call the punk movement a musical regression, at least in terms of technicality. Ouch. Still, let's be clear. Lifeson didn't hate the spirit of punk. In fact, he once admitted punk reignited a sense of raw energy and urgency in live performances. But to him, relying on power chords and an anti-skill attitude wasn't rebellion. It was artistic laziness. In classic Lifeson fashion, the comments came wrapped in humor and sarcasm. But underneath the jokes, there was a very real criticism brewing. He might not have ever dropped names like Johnny Ramone or Steve Jones, but the message was unmistakable. He didn't respect guitarists who refused to respect the instrument. Interestingly enough, some punk fans loved the fact that Lifeson was annoyed. They took it as proof that their anti-establishment mission had worked. But Lifeson wasn't just an elitist gatekeeper. To him, music deserved respect, structure, effort, motion, and thought. And in his eyes, punk had the energy but lacked the dedication to the craft. He wasn't attacking people. He was attacking a mindset, one that glorified the worse you play, the cooler you are. This was just the beginning. If we follow the trail of subtle shade, Alex Lifeson's list of guitarists he hated wasn't made of names, it was made of styles. And punk just happened to be the first in the crosshairs. If punk rock was one side of the coin Lifeson quietly rejected, the other was his complete opposite. The flashy, over-the-top shredders of the 1980s. In interviews throughout the years, Alex Lifeson made it clear he wasn't impressed by lightning-fast fingers if they weren't saying anything meaningful. And while he never singled anyone out by name, fans and critics alike picked up on his distaste for what he once described as gymnastics without emotion. For a guitarist who built his legacy on feel, mood, and experimentation, the rise of shred culture with its arpeggios at 200 BPM must have felt like music was being turned into a sport. He once remarked, "Some of those guys are incredible, but I just don't hear anything there." That single line set forums ablaze. Was he talking about Yngwie Malmsteen? Steve Vai? Maybe even early Paul Gilbert? The speculation ran wild. And while Lifeson never confirmed any targets, the message was clear. All technique and no soul wasn't his idea of greatness. He admired precision, but not if it came at the cost of personality. In his eyes, playing fast was easy. Playing something that meant something was much harder. This wasn't just a generational gap, it was a philosophical one. Where many shredders sought perfection, Lifeson leaned into imperfection. He valued the accidental bends, the strange chord voicings, the emotional noise that couldn't be replicated by machines. In a musical era when many guitarists were obsessing over sweep picking and tapping, Lifeson was still exploring how to make a delay pedal sound like a cosmic echo chamber. And that to him was real artistry. The irony? Many of the very guitarists he seemed to shade grew up idolizing him. Some even cited Rush as a major influence. But Lifeson, ever the musical idealist, didn't care for flattery if the result felt hollow. He didn't hate the players. He hated what the scene was becoming. A sterile arms race of who could play the fastest solo, with little regard for tone, phrasing, or heart. And in the quiet way only Lifeson could pull off, he let the world know he wasn't impressed. But that wasn't the end of it, because just when fans thought they had decoded his taste, Lifeson threw another curveball, one that raised even bigger questions about his relationship with another iconic guitar legend. On paper, Alex Lifeson and Eddie Van Halen couldn't be more different. One was the quiet experimentalist with a love for delay pedals and haunting textures. The other? A smiling guitar demigod who reinvented rock with two hands and a Frankenstrat. Both were geniuses, both defined generations, but behind the admiration, there was always an unspoken tension. Fans have long speculated that Lifeson had complicated feelings about Eddie, especially during the 1980s when Van Halen's style took over the world. Did Lifeson hate Eddie? Probably not. But did he resent the hype that surrounded him? That's where things get interesting. In one interview, Lifeson spoke about how the industry became obsessed with tapping and pyrotechnic solos after Van Halen's explosion. He said, "Suddenly everyone was looking for the next big trick. Nobody wanted to just play anymore." He didn't name names, but the timeline aligned perfectly with Eddie's rise. And many saw it as a subtle jab at how the guitar world shifted focus from songwriting to showboating. What made it messier was how their fan bases collided. Rush fans loved complexity. Van Halen fans loved flash. When the music press asked Lifeson about Eddie's playing, he was always polite, calling him talented and a monster player. But those compliments often came with qualifiers, "but not my style, not what I'm drawn to," or "I appreciate the innovation, but I go for something different." Translation: respect, but no love. Some even noted that after Van Halen blew up, Lifeson's solos became less traditional, almost like a rebellion. He leaned harder into atmospheric textures, odd time signatures, and minimalist phrasing, as if to say, "I'll go the opposite way." For a man who once said, "The space between notes is more important than how many you play," Eddie's influence on the culture probably felt overwhelming. Still, it's important to understand Lifeson's mindset. He wasn't against evolution, he was against imitation. He likely didn't dislike Eddie as a person or player. But he did dislike what Eddie unintentionally unleashed, an army of clones more focused on speed than soul. And in the quiet corners of interviews and subtle comments, Lifeson's discomfort leaked through. But the next wave of criticism would go even deeper, because it wasn't just individual guitarists Lifeson took issue with. It was an entire genre. As heavy metal roared into the mainstream during the late 80s and early 90s, bringing with it thunderous riffs, punishing distortion, and walls of sound, Alex Lifeson stood quietly on the sidelines, watching, listening, and at times wincing. While Rush was no stranger to heavy tones and aggressive guitar work, Lifeson's approach had always been layered, textured, and deliberate. So when asked about the rise of ultra-distorted metal guitar tones, Lifeson didn't hold back. He once quipped, "At some point, you stop hearing the notes and start hearing drywall fall off the studio walls." Ouch. To the casual fan, that may have sounded like harmless humor, but to those following the trajectory of metal's evolution, it hit close to home. Many took it as a not-so-subtle dig at the likes of Pantera's Dimebag Darrell, Slayer's Kerry King, or even the Wall of Sound style from Metallica's early days. Lifeson never said any names directly, but his critique focused on one thing: clarity. He disliked when guitar tone became so saturated that the message of the music got buried under the noise. And it wasn't just about tone, it was about intent. Lifeson often spoke about the emotional narrative in guitar playing. He wanted every note to mean something, to tell a story. In contrast, he viewed some metal solos as sound assaults, technical and brutal, yes, but lacking soul. He once said, "If your tone punches me in the face before I even hear your phrasing, maybe you're doing it wrong." For a genre that prided itself on sonic aggression, that statement landed like a sniper shot. Of course, fans of metal didn't take kindly to these opinions. Online forums lit up with debates. Some accused Lifeson of being a prog snob or out of touch. Others defended him, saying he was simply advocating for musicianship over volume. But one thing was clear: Lifeson didn't hate metal. He hated when musicality got sacrificed for sheer power. And when he described certain riffs as oral sludge, well, let's just say the message was received loud and distorted. Still, Lifeson wasn't done expressing his dissatisfaction, because after dealing with shredders and metalheads, there was another category that he just couldn't take seriously: the polished, image-obsessed pop rock guitarists dominating the charts. If there was one thing Alex Lifeson seemed to loathe even more than noise for noise metal or soulless shredding, it was style over substance. During the 2000s, as pop rock guitarists started dominating the charts with radio-friendly riffs and picture-perfect stage personas, Lifeson couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. In interviews, he never directly attacked anyone, but his critiques were sharp enough to cut through the PR polish. "Sometimes I watch these guys," he once said, "and I wonder, are they even listening to themselves, or just admiring their reflection in the monitor?" That wasn't just a casual roast. It was a direct challenge to an entire generation of guitarists who, in Lifeson's eyes, treated the instrument like a prop. He didn't name names, but fans were quick to speculate. Was he throwing shade at John Mayer, known as much for his celebrity dating life as his blues licks? Or was it directed at players from bands like Maroon 5 or Nickelback, whose guitar work, while competent, was often criticized for being formulaic and safe? Lifeson's distaste didn't come from jealousy. It came from a place of artistic frustration. He spent his career chasing originality, taking risks, and pushing boundaries. So when he saw guitarists rewarded for playing the same three polished riffs in every song while dressed in designer jackets, it didn't impress him. It bored him. He once described certain mainstream guitar tones as like wallpaper in a dentist's office. Technically clean, but completely forgettable. Savage, but on brand. And while some fans defended the pop rock stars for bringing guitar back into the mainstream, Lifeson wasn't buying it. To him, popular didn't mean powerful. Flashy didn't mean creative. He didn't care about arena lights or fashion spreads. What mattered was whether your guitar could speak, without gimmicks, without filters, without pretending to be something it wasn't. But just when people thought Lifeson had drawn the line at pop superficiality, he went a step further, turning his critical eye toward an entire wave of guitarists who, in his words, were staring at screens more than their fretboards. When grunge exploded in the early 90s, it shook the entire foundation of rock music, and not everyone was thrilled. For Alex Lifeson, whose career was built on musical complexity, structure, and layered experimentation, the arrival of grunge was both a reset and possibly a regression. While Lifeson never outwardly dismissed grunge artists, his commentary during that era suggested a subtle discomfort with the way musicianship was being stripped down to its rawest, most unrefined form. And for a man who spent decades sculpting sonic architecture, the anti-solo movement of grunge must have felt like a giant step backward. In one particularly telling interview, Lifeson admitted, "I understand the appeal of grunge, but I don't hear much guitar evolution there." That one line sparked furious debates across fan communities. Critics claimed he was too technical to appreciate the emotional grit of grunge, while Lifeson loyalists argued he was simply defending craft over chaos. Either way, the comment felt like a subtle jab, possibly at artists like Kurt Cobain, who famously rejected guitar virtuosity, or even Pearl Jam's Mike McCready, whose solos were intentionally raw and minimalistic. It's important to understand the context here. Rush was entering a difficult phase commercially while Nirvana, Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains were dominating the airwaves with fuzzed-out riffs and angst-laced melodies. The industry's obsession with grunge sidelined many older progressive acts. It was a cultural shift, and not everyone adjusted smoothly. While Lifeson respected emotion and imperfection, he also feared that the pendulum had swung too far, that rock was now celebrating sloppiness as authenticity. Still, he didn't entirely reject the movement. In fact, Lifeson praised bands like Soundgarden for their darker tones and creative guitar layering. But even then, he was careful to draw a line. He liked the bands that kept some structure, as he put it. And when asked if he was inspired by grunge guitar, his response was diplomatic but frosty. "I listen to it. I get what it's about. But it's not what moves me." For a guy known for understatement, that was a big statement. So did he hate grunge guitarists? Not likely. But he did dislike the deconstruction of guitar identity that came with them. To Lifeson, the guitar wasn't just an instrument, it was a language. And grunge, in his eyes, was a dialect that sometimes sounded like mumbling. And just when it seemed like he'd aired all his grievances, Alex took one final jab, this time at an even newer generation, the ones who needed more gadgets than practice. In the last decade, a new breed of guitars has taken over the internet, armed with loop stations, pedal boards the size of spacecraft, and YouTube channels with millions of views. But for Alex Lifeson, a man who built his sound through experimentation and feel, this digital age of tech-heavy guitar playing has often felt hollow. And while he never called out specific names, his interviews began to feature more pointed critiques, comments that left fans wondering, is Lifeson quietly calling out the modern guitar world? One of his most eyebrow-raising remarks came during a podcast appearance where he was asked about the rise of bedroom guitar gods and players who build entire soundscapes using pre-programmed effects. He smirked and said, "There's a lot of pushing buttons and not much bending strings these days." A harmless joke to some, but for those paying attention, it was classic Lifeson, dry humor laced with a blade. He wasn't against technology. After all, Rush were pioneers in integrating synths and effects in progressive rock. But Lifeson's concern was with dependency. In his eyes, many modern guitarists lean too hard on tech to cover for weak fundamentals. He once commented, "You can stack 20 effects on a riff, but if the riff's boring, it's still boring." That line quickly made the rounds on musician forums, with some defending him as a traditionalist and others labeling him a gatekeeper. The truth is, Lifeson admired innovation, but only when it served the music. He wasn't impressed by looping a phrase endlessly or syncing with the click track until perfection stripped out every ounce of soul. He was chasing the moment, not the algorithm. And in a world where viral TikTok solos and plug-in presets dominate guitar culture, Lifeson's analog roots felt almost rebellious. He also criticized the trend of visual-first musicianship, where gear reviews, pedal tricks, and complex light shows sometimes overshadow the actual playing. "Are you making music or building a science project?" he quipped in one interview, prompting laughter and a few bruised egos. Of course, some modern guitarists took inspiration from his legacy, even if they fell into the category he poked fun at, and ironically, many of them still cite Lifeson as a major influence. But admiration doesn't always mean alignment. Lifeson's message was clear. Gadgets are great, but if you can't move someone with 6 strings and your fingers, maybe you're just pushing buttons, literally and figuratively. By this point, his views were starting to form a pattern, not one of personal grudges, but of deep musical principles. And while some fans misunderstood his sarcasm, others took it a step further, building full conspiracy theories around the guitars he secretly couldn't stand. By now, it was clear that Alex Lifeson wasn't afraid to speak his mind, even if he wrapped his words in sarcasm and laughter. But in the age of the internet, subtle jabs don't stay subtle for long. Fans, bloggers, and armchair detectives took Lifeson's scattered remarks and began crafting their own unofficial hate list. Reddit threads popped up. YouTube compilations surfaced. Entire comment sections turned into courtroom dramas, with fans arguing over who Alex Lifeson truly couldn't stand. One Reddit thread titled, "Guitarist Lifeson Clearly Hates, Prove Me Wrong," gained thousands of upvotes. Among the accused, Kurt Cobain for his rejection of guitar solos, Yngwie Malmsteen for being the poster child of speed over substance, Chad Kroeger for his polished pop rock formulas, and even John Mayer, who many felt was too image-driven for Lifeson's taste. Of course, none of these names were ever confirmed by Lifeson himself, but that didn't stop fans from connecting the dots with the enthusiasm of a true crime podcast host. Even more interesting was how fans began dissecting Lifeson's facial expressions in interviews, pausing clips frame by frame to catch a raised eyebrow or sarcastic smirk when another guitarist's name came up. One clip in particular, where he chuckled awkwardly after being asked about Van Halen, became a mini viral moment. "That's not a laugh of admiration," one fan insisted. "That's a laugh of judgment." But it wasn't just fans fueling the fire. Some music journalists joined in, writing think pieces like, "Does Lifeson secretly loathe modern guitar heroes?" or "The quiet disdain of Alex Lifeson." These articles often cited his long silences, his carefully chosen words, and his tendency to shift the conversation away from popular names. Some even suggested that the reason Lifeson didn't name names was because he didn't want to start a war. But that didn't mean the war wasn't quietly happening in his mind. Still, all this speculation says more about the fans than it does about Lifeson. The hunger to assign rivalries and feuds to musical legends is a tale as old as rock and roll itself. And in Lifeson's case, his dry delivery and cryptic tone only made the guessing game more addictive. But as the theories got wilder, one question remained. Was this really about hate or something deeper? After all the clues, jabs, sarcasm, and speculation, it's worth asking the question plainly. Did Alex Lifeson ever truly hate any guitars? The answer, according to everything we know, is a resounding probably not. Because for Lifeson, the critiques were never about people, they were about principles. He wasn't attacking personalities, he was defending the essence of guitar playing. Throughout his career, Lifeson remained an advocate for musicianship, true musicianship. He valued creativity over repetition, feeling over perfection, and risk over formula. When he mocked shredders, he wasn't tearing them down, he was mourning the loss of emotion in favor of ego. When he jabbed at pop rock stars, it wasn't personal. It was about resisting an industry that rewarded style over substance. And when he poked fun at tech-obsessed modern players, he was challenging a generation to reconnect with their instrument, not just their plugins. Even his silence spoke volumes. Lifeson rarely got into public disputes, never went on rants, and refused to participate in direct takedowns. That restraint didn't come from fear, it came from discipline. He understood the weight of his words. So when he did make a comment, people listened, analyzed, and sometimes overanalyzed. But to Lifeson, it was simple. If you're not saying something through your playing, what's the point? He once said in an interview, "I respect anyone who picks up a guitar and finds their voice. I just don't connect with all of them." And that line may be the key to this entire mystery. He didn't have a blacklist. He had boundaries, artistic ones. And if a player stepped too far outside of what he believed guitar should be, he let it be known in the driest, most Canadian way possible. At the end of the day, the idea of a hate list says more about us, the fans, than it does about Lifeson himself. We want drama. We crave rivalries. We love imagining behind-the-scenes tension among the gods of rock. But the truth is far more nuanced. Lifeson didn't hate. He critiqued. He questioned. He cared. Still, as he enters his 70s with a legacy secured and nothing left to prove, one can't help but wonder, are there still a few names he's keeping to himself? Guitarists who cross his artistic line just a little too far? Maybe the real list exists, but if so, it's locked away in the same vault where Lifeson keeps his best punchlines. So after all the rumors, jokes, subtle digs, and fan-fueled theories, one thing becomes clear. Alex Lifeson may never hand us a clean-cut list of 6 guitarists he hated. And maybe that's the point. The mystery is the message, because Lifeson's legacy isn't about confrontation, it's about conviction. He never needed to shout to be heard. His quiet standards, sharp humor and razor-edged honesty said it all. Whether he was critiquing punk minimalism, shredding excess, metal distortion, or modern overproduction, Lifeson wasn't throwing shade for attention. He was defending a deeper truth, that guitar playing should say something real. It should move people. And in his eyes, too many players were chasing fame, followers, or flashy technique while forgetting the feel. So, did he ever hate anyone? Probably not in the way we imagine, but did he reject certain values, styles, and trends? Absolutely. And in doing so, he gave us a clearer picture of what he believed guitar should be. Honest, expressive, evolving, human. Still, the door isn't fully closed. Maybe somewhere in a backstage green room or a half-drunk hotel conversation, Lifeson has named names. Maybe there really is a list, never published, never written down, just passed quietly among close friends who know when a raised eyebrow means more than 1,000 words. Maybe that's the most rock and roll move of all. Guitar. Which guitarist do you think Lifeson secretly couldn't stand? Drop your guess in the comments. We're watching. Television, and don't forget, like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the untold truths of music's most iconic legends. Thank you for watching. Find other interesting videos in our channel's playlist.